History books tell us the Revolutionary War was won with muskets, bayonets, and cannons. But in the freezing winter of 1777, George Washington was fighting something far more terrifying. Not the British Empire, not General Howe, something invisible, something merciless. Smallpox. It spread through the Continental Army faster than any British bullet ever could. At the worst moment, nearly a quarter of Washington's soldiers were unfit for duty, not because of wounds from battle, but because of fever, agony, and disease. Washington understood the nightmare clearly. If he did nothing, the revolution could die in the snow before spring ever arrived. So he reached for a solution so dangerous, so controversial, that he kept it secret from his own government. He was about to gamble the future of the nation on a medical procedure his own soldiers feared almost as much as death. The British had a weapon they did not need to fire, and it was already inside the American camp. To understand Washington's desperation, you have to understand the brutal difference between the two armies. Many British soldiers had grown up in crowded European cities, where smallpox had already swept through generations before them. Most had survived it as children, and that meant they were protected. The Americans were different. They came from farms, forests, and isolated colonies. Many had never been exposed at all. To smallpox, they were wide open. When it struck a camp, it did not simply spread. It exploded. A man might begin with a headache, then a fever, then the feeling that his own blood was boiling. And soon after that, the skin erupted in painful sores that covered the body. The British knew the Americans were vulnerable, and there were even dark whispers that infected civilians were being sent toward American lines. A primitive form of biological warfare. Washington watched his army weaken from the inside. He knew a sick army could not win a war, so he faced the question no commander wants to face. Do you let the disease win, or do you try something unthinkable? To save the revolution, Washington had to accept a procedure so risky, it was deeply controversial. In the 1770s, there was no vaccine. There was only variolation, and it sounded like something out of a nightmare. A doctor would make a cut in a healthy person's arm, then introduce material from a smallpox sore into the wound. The hope was simple: give the body a controlled case of the disease, so it could fight back and survive the real thing later. But there was a terrible danger. Sometimes the controlled case turned violent. Sometimes it became fatal. And for days afterward, the infected soldier could spread disease to everyone around him. That was the real terror. One man might survive. A whole camp might not. This was why the practice was so feared. Washington was now standing between two disasters: follow caution and watch his army collapse from disease, or take the risk himself and possibly kill the very men he was trying to save. Washington knew that if the British found out, they could crush the revolution while the Americans were helpless. So in February 1777, he made his move. Quietly, secretly, he ordered his medical staff to inoculate every soldier who had not already had smallpox. Not later, not when things were safer. Now, but it had to remain hidden, because for the next 2 weeks, those men would be weak, feverish, and unable to fight. Imagine thousands of soldiers, the backbone of the Continental Army, lying in their huts too sick to stand. If the British discovered that at the wrong moment, they would not need a genius strategy. They could simply march in and destroy an entire army in bed. So Washington locked down the camps. Guards watched the roads. Movement was restricted. The army, for a time, became a fortress full of patience. It was an extraordinary act of leadership. He was sacrificing short-term strength for long-term survival. He was betting the war on tomorrow. While history remembers the hunger and the cold of winter camp, the real battle was happening inside the soldiers themselves. The scenes inside those huts were brutal. Men shivering, men sweating, men moaning through the night as their bodies fought the disease. Washington knew the suffering personally. He had survived smallpox as a young man, so he understood exactly what his men were enduring. He saw the fear, he heard the pain, and he carried the weight of every life that did not make it through. Because there were losses. There always were. If the operation failed, Washington would not just lose the war. He would be blamed for experimenting on his own army. He would be remembered not as a hero, but as a man who gambled with lives and lost. And yet, the weeks passed, the fevers broke, the sores healed, the scabs fell away, and slowly something remarkable happened. A new army began to emerge. Thinner, yes. Scarred, yes. But stronger in the only way that mattered. They were immune. They had faced the invisible enemy and survived it. When spring came, the British realized they were no longer dealing with the same army they had chased through the winter. The Americans could move, they could camp, they could fight, and they could survive in places that had once been deadly. The invisible enemy had been tamed. Washington's decision changed the war in a way most people never think about. Not through a dramatic charge, not through a single battlefield victory, but through prevention, through discipline, through a decision made in fear, secrecy, and cold calculation. And in the end, it worked. The Continental Army became far more resilient, and Washington had protected the future of the Revolution before it could be destroyed by disease. That is what made this such a remarkable gamble. He did not just command soldiers, he protected the Army's future. We often remember George Washington as the general on horseback, the man who led America toward independence. But one of his greatest acts of leadership may have been quieter than any battle. He chose a lancet instead of a sword, a medical risk instead of a military victory, because leadership is not always loud. It is not always glorious. Sometimes it means making a terrifying decision, one that others do not understand, because you know it is the only path that gives your people a chance to survive. Washington saw what others feared to face. He risked his reputation. He risked his command. He risked the trust of his own men. And in doing so, he helped save the revolution before the United States was even born. Because sometimes, the bravest thing a president can do is face the truth and act before it is too late. And that is a story worth remembering. If this hidden chapter of the revolution stayed with you, subscribe to the President's Stories. Because history is full of moments like this, hidden, powerful, and waiting to be told.